Oh, you had to drop one of us. Why didn't you drop me, Richard? So I can get a good night's sleep.
Come on. Don't be a grumpy old man, Bruce. Okay. So, hello, good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time you're listening to us. This is the Translations Across the World panel at the 2025 Hausa International Book and Arts Festival. My name is Richard Ali, and I will be your host throughout this conversation. I won't be here all alone talking to myself, which would be very awkward. So I've got two people in the studio with me. We've got Dr. Umar Abdullahi Musa and Bruce Humes. Professor Michael Cooperson from the UCLA was supposed to be with us, but unfortunately he could not make it. So Dr. Umar Aliu Musa, who is a scholar of Hausa language and literature, and a lecturer of the Asian African Institute at the University of Hamburg. Her research explores Hausa popular fiction, women's writing, oral performance, and digital literary cultures. She's the author of Emotions in Muslim Hausa Women's Fiction, a landmark study revealing the complexity of women's voices in so-called romance genres. Her work highlights how Hausa storytelling negotiates emotion, social critique, and cultural identity. Dr. Musa's scholarship bridges northern Nigeria and global academia, making her a leading voice on how Hausa narratives travel, transform, and are translated across diverse worlds. For his part, Bruce Humes is a bilingual China publishing consultant and acclaimed Chinese to English literary translator. His translations include Confessions of a Jade Lord, The Last Quarter of the Moon, and the iconic popular fiction Shanghai Baby, as well as cultural works on Chinese art, dress, and tea. He has worked extensively within China's publishing ecosystem, leading editorial teams, producing marketing content, and promoting literature that explores the experience of non-Han ethnic minorities in China. His diverse career spans translation, journalism, market intelligence, export training, and immigration counseling. Bruce Humes brings a rare cross-cultural perspective on how stories move between languages, markets, and cultural identities. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Translations Across the World panel at the 2025 Hausa International Book Festival. So let's get into the business of the matter. Considering between two very eminent people, I would like to quickly pass the hot potato to the two of you. So I'd like to start by centering your own work as translators in your own words, partly because, of course, I do not wish to presume, but also because, I'd like to put the two of you on the spot. So could you each tell us how you came about the world of literary and academic translations, the most personally significant work you have done, and because I'm of liver twist, something private that you think only fellow translators would understand? Perhaps we start with you, Umar. I can see Bruce is already smiling.
Yeah, I think Bruce would be the one to have as a popular translator, as you said when you were telling us about him. So, as you know, I teach Hausa language, and then I confront translations or discussions about translation mostly in my classroom with students. But when we take a step back to talk about translators, also related to the field of Hausa fiction writing, I would like to point out that it's very much a necessity. If we take, for example, how I came into the field of popular fiction, because I see that even among native speakers, how often household fiction was dismissed as light reading, something just simple, when it offered rich insights into emotions, gender narratives, and everyday moral negotiations. So, looking at it and working on it, as also in my book, Emotions in Muslim Women's Fiction, I wanted to show that these stories carry more weight than the labels suggested, even though these labels are, I mean, because the in-depth is not really analyzed by many people. So for translators, I would say the safest approach is to treat the books as social documents as much as narratives. You should pay attention to the emotional codes, which is also what I try to look at. I try to look at, for example, anger in Muslim women's fiction writings. And in these stages of anger, I was able to see these women are talking about forced marriages. These women are talking about polygamy. These women are talking about co-wives. I mean, which is all part of narratives that affects northern Nigeria. And one should pay attention to these emotional codes, the moral debates, and the cultural texture. So if one wants only translates the plot, will end up flattening the work. So if you translate the world behind the plot, I mean, one gets to have the depth, and that is what I try to show when I analyze the several of the House of Women's fiction in my book.
Thank you very much, Uma. So, Bruce, how did you come to the world of translations? What was your most personally significant work? And tell us something private you think only a fellow translator would understand.
Well, actually, like a lot of foreigners who came to East Asia in the 80s and the 90s, I found myself often doing a bit of translation because there weren't a lot of other people that knew both the languages that I knew, which were Chinese and English. So I more or less got pushed into it. But basically, I spent a good decade or so on creating Chinese business magazines for Chinese business people. And then I was in the States um, giving a talk to, um, I was asked to leave the States and come back to China, excuse me, to tell people in China about the fact that a lot of American business people were now no longer doing business by coming to China, coming to import goods. They were actually sitting in the States going on the web, which at that time, around 2000, was a pretty new thing. So I was in China talking about this, and I stopped in a subway station and I saw a book with a pretty girl on the cover, and I picked it up and I thought, this book looks interesting. I took it home, and in between my lectures, I read it like 3 days. I thought this book is something that people in the West want to read, and it's called Shanghai Baby. Um, and if you want to talk about something that's a little that translators should be able to relate to. I got a lot of flack for translating this book because many Chinese people felt that it was pretty trashy, and it really shouldn't have seen the light outside of China. So I remember, many times having to defend why I translated the book. Actually, it's good fun, uh, and by Western standards, it's pretty tame. At any rate, so uh, after that, I left the world of business publishing and got into translating first Shanghai Baby and then other books because I felt that during the 80s and the 90s that we'd spent a lot of time helping Chinese business people understand the world outside, but now it was time for the world to learn about what was going on in China. And I thought it was a good person to introduce it. And so I decided to go the other way. So basically, I now for about a good decade, I've been specializing in um, introducing writing by and about what are referred to as altaic peoples. And that would be basically peoples like, well, the Manchu, uh, Mongolians, Uyghurs, Kazakhs, other Turkic Muslims who are either within China's borders or right outside of them to the north. And the reason I got interested in them is, first of all, they were very underrepresented in translation. And secondly, they're nomadic to a large extent, and the Chinese are famously sedentary, meaning that they're farmers, and they work and they live in a village, for hundreds of years. Their family stays there, and I found it interesting to be dealing with people who were on the frontier of China, but were in fact quite the opposite. They're nomadic.
Uh, I think that's quite interesting. I'm going to take off from something you said about an interest in the underrepresented people and then move back to Ummah. So your work, of course, which we have spoken about, has centered on the Soyeya novels, the Kanu market literature, as it were. These soft cell novellas, for those who don't know what Soyeya novels are, uh, which are very popular and very cheap. So, they sell a lot of copies. So your research has explored how Hausa women's fiction carries emotional and political depth that is often overlooked by readers across several categories. Therefore, this engagement, this emotional and political depth is underrepresented, similar to what Bruce has said. So I guess my question is this, how did you personally come about this field of academic inquiry, and how should non-academic translators navigate the risk of reducing this to, mere simple romance, which is something you're quite concerned about?
Yeah, I think, okay, well, I would like to start by saying that I studied Hausa language at Bayero University, Kano. I did my bachelor and master's. Of course, part of my research started with linguistics, but much later on, I moved on to popular culture and I did my PhD at the University of Leipzig, African studies. So all these, being a native Hausa speaker also helped. And interestingly, my supervisor happened to be a historian. And so the navigation to look back and see things are things that, I have seen also debates online or general discussions. Other scholars have talked about these novels. But I think one of the problems we face is that there is not much translations going on. And actually, this is where I find this program or this discussion interesting, is to really voice out that there is a need to just look at it from the face value and decide that they are so. Yeah, I really don't even want to use the term at all. I prefer to say, House of Females or women's fiction narratives. And interestingly, also there are many more male authors of this genre. So I think the best thing is for one to delve into it, to have these. If I answer, I hope this is exactly what you have asked me. But to read these books and to be able to get the message this woman ask. Hausa society is a place where so many needs of women. This is not just the society itself, but in many other cultures are not fully known until they voice it out. They have to talk about their problem. What is the problem? What are the issues they face? So these women have grown up in a place whereby most of what they have written reflects the society they live in, and for them to be able to pen it down, I think uh, it's should be seen that and narratives are not just rigid or conservative in a uniform way. It should be about when I translate, for example, or teach these texts, I frame them as conversations within the community, not rule books. So I feel like translators can help by signaling that tension, by discussing about it. Every aspect of the novels of these women, they try to give out a message. I hope I have answered what you want to say, what you have
Uh,
asked.
Yeah,
I wanted
yes,
to ask a question quickly. Uma,
okay.
you said there isn't all that much translation going on, correct? Are you talking about from Hausa or Indo Hausa or another group of languages?
No, I'm talking about Hausa books, Hausa fiction writings to other languages. Yeah, we have among the Hausa. House, there are lots of female house of female writers which are recorded. I mean, a lot of research has gone on. I mean, by different scholars in the U.S., in Europe, about house of fiction writing, mostly by female authors. But I mean, direct translation to other languages is something that I think needs to be discussed about and to be brought out, because there are other good. I mean, there are books that require extra editing, which is, I think, Richard Ali should know. I mean, these are the issues that these authors face, but there are also among them other excellent authors who have written and who have done, for example, become known under the narratives of, for example, BBC competition that gets organized every year. So there are selected authors that I think their works are very good and worthy to be translated from Hausa to other languages.
I see. I think Richard knows that a while ago I was doing a bit of research into which authors from Africa
Okay.
have been translated into Chinese.
Hmm.
Yes, I think that that's something I'm going to get to actually. It's a question that I've got ahead for both of you.
Okay.
And I would have really liked Professor Cooperson here to also give it. But yeah, so let's go back to you, Bruce. China, the Chinese language comes across as this really great literary frontier. There's this saying, presumably an Arab saying, that you should seek knowledge all the way to China. And of course, this has become even more of an issue as China has once again reasserted its role as one of the world's great powers. But, from your earlier engagement, there is in reality no one single the Chinese. There's Mandarin, there's Cantonese, there's Hokkien, and several other dialects. And then there's the question of course, non-dominant yet Chinese ethnicities, which you've mentioned, like the Uyghurs,
Right.
which of course forms a part of your most recent work. So I guess my question is this, all right. You have the vantage of China and the Chinese language and culture that we can benefit from. So I'm going to throw it to you. What is China and what is the Chinese sphere of language, especially as it relates to your own translation work?
Uh, the first part of the question was, what is China?
What is China? Yes, yes. I'm coming from the other end of the world, and I've been told to go to the other end of the world to seek knowledge in this thing, this place, this
Right.
concept, this idea called China. So
Right.
know China. What is
Okay.
China? And what is the
Well,
Chinese sphere of language, especially as it relates to your translation work?
okay. So the what is China question, that's not easy to explain, but very briefly, the China that I've known, of course, is China after 1949. So that is a country which had a socialist revolution and is a one-party state. And so, um, on the one hand, there's this revolutionary tradition and moving forward in what is called socialism with Chinese characteristics. But on the other hand, there is, the Chinese will tell you 5,000 years of tradition behind them, and probably the two main strains of thought would be Confucianism and Buddhism, as it was practiced in China. So, um, when I first started getting interested in China, I was terribly interested in Mao Zedong, in the revolution, and then after the Cultural Revolution, which was 1965 to 1975, gradually there's been a reassertion of this tradition of Confucianism. So today we have someone like Xi Jinping, the current president of China, who on the one hand is, the head of the party and the head of the socialist revolution, if you like. But on the other hand, a lot of things are being said which hark back to Confucius, and that was 2,500 years ago. So they're coexisting, and it's a contradiction. Um, and the language that I translate shows that, because um, I would think, unlike many languages, for the Chinese, things that Confucius said, and before him, poetry, history, um, are part of what a young person would be speaking at school or on the street. In other words, um, classical Chinese is very much part of modern Chinese. So my own specialty is in modern Chinese, but all of the things that I translate occasionally have things in them which are terms or ideas or references to 1, 2, 3, 4,000 years ago. And these things are not considered exotic or strange. And here I'm living in Taiwan right now, and I'm sure that any 6 or 7 year old could recite a Tang Dynasty poetry, a poem. So it's pretty amazing in that sense. Anyway, the Chinese language, um, in order to be able to, say, go to university in China, you have to have a good command of, say, 10,000 characters. And those characters, although they contain a phonetic element, they are not phonetic per se. So, to give you a sense of how massive that is, in Japan today, a well-educated person in Japan only needs to know about 2,000 Chinese characters, which they would refer to as kanji. But if you want to go to university in China and consider yourself fairly well educated, you need to be able to recognize at least 10,000 and write, 4 or 5 of them.
Hmm.
So I hope that gives you an idea of the challenge.
Oh dear, I shall no longer seek for knowledge. I think I'm quite confident. I think I'm quite confident where I am with my 26 alphabets, huh? I'm not doing this.
Well, you should come to Germany and have the other, alphabets.
Yes, in the hard Ks and all of that. Yeah, okay. I remember Frankfurt, lovely, lovely country a few years ago. So yeah, so I think this segues nicely into my next question for Umma, about Hausa literature, particularly the way it moves between oral traditions and, of course, the oral traditions, the Tatsuniyoyi that you've got, which we all met as kids. And then, of course, there's the Ajami heritage, which is, of course, Hausa written in Arabic script. And, of course, then subsequently Roman script. And now everything has gone digital. Digital platforms such as Wattpad are now major mediators in the Hausa language. So here's my question. From your vantage as an academic and somebody who's interested in these issues, what is lost or gained when these layered forms are translated into global literary languages like English or German? That leap between Hausa, the oral, to Ajami or to Roman script, then the digital, and then a whole new language. What tends to get lost? What tends to get flattened?
Well, this is a heavy one. Yeah, this is a
I'm
heavy,
not giving
right?
I'm not giving easy questions.
Yeah,
Hard ones.
yeah, but actually, I would say it from the perspective of my classroom, and so I would say something is always lost, and over the years with my students, depending on which class, for example, I have the beginners class, the intermediary class, and the advanced class. So these stages, we start with translations along the way for them to have more rich vocabularies. Some are lucky when they go to Nigeria between 3 to 4 months. In Kano, for example, we have our connection with the Bayero University Kano. They tend to learn the Hausa and come back and also get stronger in how they translate works. So we start with passages. In some advanced settings, we also do things from the newspapers, but often we also delve into Hausa literature, and we have translations either from Hausa to English, and English to Hausa and also to German. So as we navigate through, and uh, as I said before I answer, there are often words and also phrases that it's very hard to connect to a given language. I'll give you an example. The word, which I think you know, Richard, the word "santi." Yeah,
Santi. Yes,
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 and
yes.
I mean, it's. I mean, I don't know. In as much I may want to explain to Bruce, I think it should be like the only I've been thinking about it. How do I connect it to English or even to German? But then one day it just occurred to me. I think it doesn't, but it doesn't even give the whole translation. But I remember umami, because I mean, umami has become a kind of an international word. Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, of course, from Asia, about food, about its deliciousness. When people, so they use the word umami, but still, if I connect it to Santi, it still doesn't give this cultural feeling of Santi where you see somebody, you don't have to tell the person who is enjoying eating a certain food that, oh, he's acting out of order because it's just so delicious. You just pick something, a heavy, a pillow or something, and put it behind him just to support so that the person doesn't fall. So how do you give this explanation, into another language? And when we take this away, we look at, for example, zumunta or zumunchi. I mean, I look at it, and the only word that came to my mind is social relationship. Because, I mean, this is one of the etiquettes of Hausa culture, Nigerian culture. I would say the ability for people to reach out to families, visit families, greet families, be with families, do things with families. So, how do you explain that to us in a different language, just one word or even a phrase to be able to reach out and say that this is very much significant and part of the Hausa society? So these are things that I want to say, add by saying something, it's always lost. When you take, for example, Ajami or literature, for example, the musicality of the oral voice. If you take Ajami, the layered meanings of the Ajami, and also the playful informality of digital writing. So something, but still at the same time, in as much as things are lost along the way, something is also gained. So I would say that translation give new works, new audiences, and new interpretive possibilities. So I think the key is to translate with awareness of the origin. So let the translated version carry a trace of its earlier form, even if only through rhythm, imagery, or brief contextual cues. So I think by having this kind of open discussions, because I do so with my students, we try to find how do you feel, and I mean this way I also over the years been able to connect to words of German. I was asking, saying to one of my students, for example, when you go to the restaurant, you say, "I want something." I would like to have something. So, I mean, you, Richard, when you go to the restaurant in Nigeria, it's very direct. Yeah, but in German, you say, "Ich hätte gerne." So I wanted to feel this gerne feeling, because it's so polite, it's so nice to use it. But if I don't connect to the feeling that it's a very polite way to address a waiter, it's get lost in the process. So often at the beginning, I used to say "ich möchte," I want, because I prefer it. It's more comfortable and more closer to how I speak in Hausa. But gradually, I transitioned and feel connected that it's more polite, it's more flowery into my ears, to really say, I really want this. This is what I want, and how you express it to want to order food in German language, for example. So,
And of course, I think it's quite interesting that all this has to do with food. Huh?
yeah.
So yeah, so yeah, Bruce. So like you picked from Umar's response. In Hausa and several other Nigerian languages, we have these concepts, that go so deeply into the heart of the culture that they cannot be translated. But that's what a translator must do. They need to cut through and shine the light of meaning, as it were. So what has been the most difficult Chinese idiom or stylistic feature that you've ever had to translate, and how did you finally render it into English? Of course, Chinese here, including your Altaic interests, Chinese writ large. Yeah.
Right. So right off, I would say I find the challenge for me is twofold. So I specialize in writing by Altaic writers. They're writing in Chinese, so it may not be their mother tongue. So a Uyghur may speak Uyghur at home, and he's learned Chinese only at school, for instance. So at any rate, I don't know Uyghur. I don't know Mongolian. I've studied Turkish, but that's not quite the same thing. So I have to deal with two very different things. And one of them is that in Chinese, there are these four character idioms, which are all over the place. And Chinese use them all the time. Again, they could be back from Confucian time, whatever. They're already very challenging to translate. But because the books that I'm translating are by a Mongolian writer or by a Uyghur writer, a Kazakh writer, actually, the other challenge is how to translate the concept that is integral to their culture and which may not even have been very well explained in Chinese. Um, a lot of Chinese, for instance, their idea of Islam is you don't eat pork. So that's not a, there's a lot more to it than that. So a lot of the things that I'm going to need to translate, even for a Chinese person, would be strange, exotic, unknown. Yeah. So on the one hand, I've got these Chinese idioms that I have to deal with, and there are tens of thousands of them. Uh, and these four words that they would use trigger a response among Chinese speakers all over the world. It's a bit like if you were to say, I don't know, in the States, which is a very, Protestant society, very Christian society, um, cleanliness is next to godliness. Oh, people get the message immediately. Yeah. But the same thing in Chinese, even for a person who's illiterate, he will hear these phrases and he'll be able to make sense of them. So that aside, I try to focus on the more indigenous peoples and their concepts. And one of the challenges there is that actually there's quite a bit of censorship. And so they may not be able to write about those things openly. So, for instance, I just finished translating a novel. It's by a Han Chinese, that would be a mainstream Chinese, but he grew up in Xinjiang. And Xinjiang is the part of China over there by all the stands, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, etc. And the Uyghur in the book, they're speaking a Uyghur tongue. So it might strike you as shocking, but everybody in the book, except for just a handful of people that come in and out, are speakers of Turkic. They're Uyghur. The word Uyghur does not appear in the book. No one, and the Uyghurs are Muslim, and of course they go to the mosque. No one goes to the mosque in the book. There is a mosque, and there is an imam, and he's an important person. But there are these things, and they just can't be talked about. So one of the interesting challenges that I've had working with the co-translator, who's Chinese, is because I've studied Turkish, and the Uyghur are a Turkic people. I can immediately see in the text things that look very Chinese, that actually are Uyghur words, and they have not been transliterated in Chinese. But I know that that's the kind of food, or that's the place where they sleep. Um, and I know the Turkic word. I look it up. I can find the Uyghur. We hired a Uyghur consultant. And so we actually introduced Uyghur words into the English version that were not clearly Uyghur in the Chinese. And so that's something I enjoy, and it's a challenge. And frankly, the people that hired us to translate the book, it's a Chinese publisher, they might be a little nervous about that because um, those words weren't in Uyghur, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that today in China, there's a lot of pressure on Uyghurs not to practice Islam, not to speak Uyghur. It's now forbidden in school, for instance. So, two very different challenges. One is to bring the Chinese out, some of which is very ancient, and the other is to remind our readers these are Uyghurs.
Mm. That's a very serious responsibility that translators, have to mediate between these languages, and I think it highlights the centrality of translations. So let me move up to you, Umar, but then I would also like your take on this question, Bruce, which is this idea of linguistic walls. For example, in the African context, a lot of the literature and the language, um, there's far more literature and language than the average educated person has access to. And this is, of course, because of colonialism in this case. You have a wealth of Lusophone African writing, and Francophone African writing, which an Anglophone speaking or an Anglophone person who reads Anglophone literature would simply not have any access to. Even when people are multilingual, it's often not in those languages. It's English to something, French to something, but not English to French or not English to Portuguese. So here's my question. It's about colonialism, really. In your work, Umar, have you come across this linguistic walls, between maybe one type of Hausa and another type of Hausa, for example, and then that leap to say something like German, and the same thing, in the case of Bruce, for example, when you're translating something you've mentioned from a Turkic aspect to a Han Mandarin Chinese centrality, the relationship is essentially similar. It's almost colonial in both cases. So could you expand on these linguistic walls, and how, as a translator, you try to break them down? Umma?
Yeah, okay. Yes, I will start by saying that living in Hamburg, I mean, gradually, for over 10 years, so I have seen the rise of Hausa speakers here. Yeah, so this is away from the classroom, of course, but the largest population of Hausa speakers are from Ghana and then Niger Republic. So, so when I moved to Hamburg, the first thing is, as soon as I hear a Ghanaian speaker speaking Hausa, I know that this is from they speak from Ghana, because it's very clear, the accent and the arrangement of words. But Hausa actually happens to be their lingua franca, and it's a large community of Ghanaians speaking Hausa. Also, there's quite a large number. So the Nigerian Hausa speakers here in Hamburg, it's not as big as the Niger Republic or the Ghanaians. So in my translation work, as I talk to these people, or maybe also as I encounter text within classrooms, or even text online, there are connections actually and differences. For example, one thing that my students also notice is the use of the dictionary. I mean, the use of dictionary is mandatory, and I'm happy that it has also enriched me to be able to see different says between Hausa speakers as a influence of the loan words from English, for example, and also in the dictionary translations that denote that this is from Niger Republic, and that is also another influence of the French. So this plays a role also as when people talk. At the same time, for Ghanaian speakers, you find that it's I mean it's in Ghana it's a large community that come from different countries, but mostly from Nigeria and Niger Republic, and they have a community. So living in that community, which they call Zongo, allows you to, or even near the Zango, allows you to assimilate and even probably become Hausa. So moving back to Hamburg here, and how people of different languages. I've asked somebody in living here from Togo, where did you learn Hausa so fluently? He said, on the streets in Togo. But what's your language? He said, Ewe. So there are people like that. So Hausa has become, even here in Germany, a kind of a lingua franca. So, for example, there are words that kusfa, for example, which is you wouldn't hear that, but it's a word for toilet, you know, which I didn't know until I came here, and also with my interactions with the Ghanaian speakers. Or they said shafi, which means a word for key. So these are things that, or even a word which, as a result of contact, I would say chimagani, literally to eat medicine, which is
Yes.
yeah, which talks about migrants,
Yes.
refugees who come in and then were able to get asylum. Yeah, seekers, yeah, to put it roughly. So these are words that are new words that are created and also adding to this linguistic notions that you talk about. At the same time, for my class purposes, I mean, one of my students was able to translate Ruwan Bagaja, the water of cure, in English. By the author Abubakar Imam. I mean, the
Kalima.
classic, yeah, the classic book Ruwan Bagaja. So, I mean, this novel has been first of all translated in other languages like Polish, and also German now. I mean, so it took back and forth between me and my students for many different settings to be able to discuss the nuances, the differences in culture. So, and at the same time, I have my other students, it's already published, analyzing this and featuring out different linguistic terminology, whether it is really clear or connected to the German culture, the way it is translated.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Have you come across, this colonial hangovers in terms of linguistic walls in your work with non-hand writing and cultures?
Hmm. Um, well, I'm not sure I have. I think my first reaction would be that, first of all, I've lived in mainland China, I've lived in Hong Kong, I've lived in Taiwan, and people are speaking in Hong Kong, for instance, they're speaking Cantonese, which is sounds very, very different than Mandarin. And here in Taiwan, Mandarin is now widely spoken, although there is a Taiwanese dialect, but there's a strong influence of Japanese. So there's a lot of Japanese vocabulary in Taiwan that people in China would not necessarily understand because it's written in kanji, so it's written in Chinese characters. The Taiwanese, they've heard these words, they know it, they use it, and it finds its way into their writing. But people in China wouldn't understand that. Yeah. I think for me, the important uh, wall, if you like, would be that there's a standard Mandarin, which is uh, uh, getting people to use standard Mandarin is a policy in China in order to bring about a greater sense of unity, because actually uh, only about 20% of people on the mainland speak really standard Northern Chinese, which will be Mandarin. And there are lots of places in China where the only people that will know Standard Mandarin would be younger people because they've gone to school. So the government is working very hard to make sure that as much as possible, you only hear Standard Mandarin, and that you only read it. And that means that when writers want to write in dialect, it's not easy. Uh, their editors may not allow them to use those particular characters, or there may be no easy way to write them. And there would be people who feel that literature is a serious undertaking, and you shouldn't be using dialect when you're writing for the public. So that is the sort of thing that I run into. On the spoken level here, everyone knows that I learned my Chinese, or I basically learned my Chinese in China, not in Taiwan, because all sorts of things I say, perfectly understandable. Those words exist here in Taiwan, but to them, it's like a red flag that says, "Oh, you're from over there."
Yeah, so the language was alive and well. So yeah, I think I'll take just two questions and when we wrap up. So this idea of language was clearly it exists in the Chinese and it also exists in Africa, you know, whether English, French, and Spanish and Portuguese, whether they're African languages and so on. And it's always a very lively debate, you know. But I get the sense that, you know, the language wars have been lost by natural languages. And the language that has won is the language of mathematics, the language of these AI models, you know, that is the language that has won, you know. So what are your thoughts, both of you, on the rise of artificial intelligence vis-a-vis the languages that interest you, such as Hausa, Arabic, Chinese? Yeah, so is this the death of the translator? We've heard of the death of the author, most famously. Is AI translation chatbots? Will this herald the death of the translator? But generally, you know, what are your thoughts on the rise of AI and translations for the Hausa and the Chinese? Uma?
Bruce, you want to go first?
Okay, Bruce, you get the hot potato. The Chinese have been using the chat, the WeChat, for a long time. So,
Right. Okay. Well, I think I'm qualified to talk about this because in the last month, I've been using China's chatbot, which is called DeepSeek, and it's just amazing. First of all, it seems to basically what people in the West were writing was DeepSeek is going to be censored in the same way that China media is censored. And I went to use it, and I found in certain ways, you know, very good. But I had some very strange things happen. I put up some a few phrases I want to get straight, wanted to know different ways to translate them, whatever. And at one point, I was talking about the Turkic epics, which go into the hundreds of thousands of lines. There's one called the Epic of Manas, which is more or less the origin story of the people of Kyrgyz who live in Kyrgyzstan. And I said to DeepSeek, oh, you know, it's interesting that in Chinese we have these very brief poems, the Tang Dynasty poems, and then you have these incredibly long epic poems among the Turkic peoples. And I know that during the 30s and the 40s in the Soviet Union and later in China, that the authorities were worried that about pan-Turkism. In other words, that the Uyghurs and Kazakhs and so on would relate strongly, emotionally, to the rest of the Turkic world, all the way over to Turkey. And I said, so, you know, my understanding is that some of the people that memorized the entire epics were sent off to do hard labor, in the Soviet Union. Some of them were executed, etc. And got into a great discussion with DeepSeek. And I thought, wow, this is really, I'm surprised. I think it's a very sensitive subject. And so I thought I'll copy it. And when I went to copy the discussion, it disappeared. And it said, let's talk about something else. Okay.
Very
So
earnest.
so what I learned from that is that it seems that DeepSeek probably has a very wide database like ChatGPT or whatever. And it has a censorship function, but it only kicks in after the fact. So it gives you this information and has this conversation with you, and then it says, oops,
I
forget
shouldn't
that.
have.
Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I've been using it to do just the other day. I've decided to start working on it's in Chinese, but it's a Mongolian, it's a Mongolian author from Inner Mongolia. And I took his first chapter and I put it into DeepL, which is it's a translation platform. Obviously it uses AI, but it's not a chatbot. It just gives you the translation. And then I put it into DeepSeek, and the DeepSeek um, version is totally superior.
Wow.
Okay. So I went back to Chat GPT and I said, hey, if I'm translating from Chinese into English, should I use Chat GPT or another platform or DeepSeek? And it said, oh, you should use DeepSeek. It's very good. Yeah. So I feel that I could take quite a bit of the original, put it into DeepSeek, generate a translation, and then work from that. I think it's doable. And that blows my mind because what I had been seeing on DeepL was no, you can't do that. Yeah, it's not anywhere nearly as close to good English and faithful translation. But DeepSeek, it's wild. And I asked it questions about this or that term. How could I translate it? Give me 5, 10 different definitions. Whatever you want. And I said, well, I'd like it to be country, or I'd like it to be very urban. Boom. So it's
So
mind
very
blowing.
useful.
Yeah.
So on the whole, very useful. Uma?
Yeah, well, yeah, let me add on to what Ruth just mentioned. I mean, AI is already transforming translations, but I don't think it signals the end of translators. And of course, it can signal the end of mechanical translation, but I think if I didn't use, I wouldn't say much about DeepSeek. I would it should require, maybe I think I have looked at it or used it one time, but not necessarily for translation. But for ChatGPT, yes, I have tried to test some translations to see, and I really see that there are a lot of holes. One of it is, for example,
Excuse me. Which languages are you translating from and into?
yes, it's Hausa.
Right.
Hausa.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the
Also to
Hausa language,
English.
yes, I see that because we have things to do with gender, you know. So the gender is missing, the hook letters, it's not always accurate. And at the same time, it's a bit flat because we have, I mean, Hausa is a language for translators to use in terms of the richness of the idioms and expressions, just the way people talk in the language. So I think it will require more than just I mean, of course, the AI or the ChatGPT can carry words across languages, but there's also a struggle with intention. For example, cultural knowledge and emotional nuance. So, I mean, it will be also a danger to rely on speed over meaning because the richness of the Hausa language is not really added there. So, for languages like Hausa, I think if it would I mean supersede the human translator, then the task ahead is to train the AI with culturally grounded data so that the technology supports human translators instead of erasing them. So because I see that if when I try to use a text to translate, I found that I have to make a lot of corrections, especially with the gender, because it was put a masculine instead of feminine. I mean, since in English you just say you. Of course, German you have to have the masculine and feminine z, for example, or er when it's masculine. So it's very much familiar, but still in the Hausa part, there are lots of things that needs to be added to achieve it. So at the moment, I would say the humans, I mean, talent or the addition of metaphors, idiomatic expressions, what is lacking when one does a direct translations using ChatGPT or maybe other AI.
There's still hope for us humans then.
Yeah.
Final questions. Final question. So it's been an absolute pleasure having these conversations with the two of you at the Hausa International Book and Arts Festival. But I won't let you go without this final question. Before we close the panel, um, what question do you wish I had asked you? And what's your answer to that question? And that's going to be the last cookie.
Mhm.
So, very briefly, what question do you wish I had asked you? And what's the answer to that question?
Well, I was hoping to speak about um, some of the solutions to this, untranslatability that we all come across. And one of the very inspiring, and so I wish you had said, what tools do you use or what are your strategies? And
Mhm.
there's a fairly famous translator. Her name is Susan Bernofsky, I think, and she inspired me. I read in an interview in which she talked about what she called stealth glossing. Stealth glossing. Okay, so let me read you. Let me see if I have the definition here. Yes. Okay. Stealth glossing, a term coined by translator Susan Bernofsky, is the technique of weaving small explanations or definitions for culturally specific terms directly into the narrative of a translation, making them seem natural and part of the story rather than pulling the reader out with footnotes. So for me, I found this is just absolutely essential.
Stealth blessing.
All these things. My Mongolian culture, Uyghur culture, Manchu culture. Um, how can I make it feel authentic and yet readable? And I really dislike footnotes. And
We
so,
all do.
well, but on the other hand, they could be quite useful. But for a novel, and that's really what I want to do, uh, it interferes with the experience. So
Okay.
um, I've found that um, I need to do a number of things, and one of them is often to transliterate, take a Chinese concept or a Uyghur concept, and write it out in sound it out so that anybody like you could read it and go, "Oh, I understand. I can imagine what the word sounds like," and then somehow within the same sentence, uh, make you understand what that
The
word means
context,
without saying it
what
means
it means.
this or
Yes.
it
Yeah.
means that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So stealth glossing.
So,
Okay. I'll
uh,
keep that in mind.
all right.
Okay. Uma,
Yeah,
what do
well,
you wish I had
yeah,
asked you?
yeah. Shortly, I think what came to mind is what responsibility what do translators have to the communities whose stories they share? I think this is uh, something that came to mind, and probably to say it shortly, I would say respect and accuracy, for example. I mean, not in a literal sense only, but in a cultural and ethical sense. To be able to pull the culture in, to be able to uh, I mean, when I look at one of the stories of Abu Bakr Imam, shot in Ruwan Bagaja, and then it's clearly similar to the Pete the Piper, but when reading the Hausa story, there's no way you will not think that it's not in the Hausa culture. So everything is so naturally there. Of course, I mean, researchers have already put the connection together, but a translator should ask whether their choices allow the originating community to recognize themselves, for example, in the final work. And this is actually, I feel, what's very important and what should be at the back of every translator as you translate text. Yeah, and living here gradually, I think for with my advanced classes, the students were moving on to translate short books. So I think this is something that's always challenging. How do we make it natural? How do we make it flow and acceptable? And get out the humor, connect to the culture of the people, but make it the people this language in the new language. Let them feel this culture. Let them feel the humor and laugh about it. I think that is the key. One of the important part of translation is to be able to connect culture and humor into the original into the new text.
Thank you so much, Umar, and thank you so much, Bruce, for the time you've taken. I've been fascinated by how the conversation goes and the many parallels and similarities. Unfortunately, the lovely people at the Hausa Book and Arts Festival say it's time to go. So do not blame me for not continuing. Blame Sada. And please say goodbye to the people in the panel who will be listening in a few days' time. Thank you all so
Okay, yeah.
much and goodbye.
Okay. Okay, bye.
Bye
Thank you so
bye.
much for this.